concepts of nationalism, but also those concepts of nationalism that have been ingrained into Indian political discourse. But then they have been challenged by other discourses that don't fit the Kashmir case either. The notion that Islam and the national identity of all Kashmiris is identical. This complicated intersection, I think, is what we're going to hear about this evening. So, as I say, it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Khalid Hassan, who is presently a visiting fellow at Cambridge in the Department of Politics and International Relations. But he was also, I'm pleased to say, a Charles Wallace Fellow at the South Asia Institute at SOAS in 2017. And, as it were, his regular job is assistant professor at the Department of Politics and Governance at the Central University in Kashmir. That's in Srinagar? Yeah. And he completed his PhD from the Institute of Social and Economic Change in Bangalore, where he worked on Islamist and secular discourses in post-1988 self-determination movement in Kashmir, which I think is going to be the basis for the talk this evening. And he's also been working on the emergence of multiple public spheres among Muslims in Kashmir. And his other research areas include post-colonial theory, ethnic and nationalist movements in South Asia, and human rights. And he teaches courses on political theory, comparative politics, and peace and conflict studies at both graduate and postgraduate level. So let me welcome Dr. Hassan and invite him to talk to us.
Thank you so much. My today's talk is based on the fieldwork which was conducted in Kashmir Valley. For the last couple of years, I have been working on post-1989 self-determination movement in Kashmir and trying to look at various discourses that are within the movement and various stakeholders that are propagating the idea of self-determination, independence, and which is a mix of various voices. 2016, if some of you are aware of, was called as a year of turbulence in Kashmir. A lot of things happened in a period of a couple of months, and it was so fast. A lot of people who have written on Kashmir, who are academically engaged in Kashmir conflict, they wrote a lot about human rights violations that have happened, but that have been happening for the last 3 decades, but particularly 2016 was kind of a marker because it was new in many ways, and it was kind of bringing back memories of 1990s. Atrocities in terms of military violations, and as well as the new forms of the violence that people saw across Kashmir Valley in different villages, in different towns. But one more thing that actually happened was the changing discourse of the movement, where this question was brought back, that what is the guiding force of the movement there? Because the processions that were happening, the slogans, the graffitis on the walls, it didn't speak so much clearly, because it was kind of a mix of secular as well as slogans of Islamic connotations. So I was thinking about this whole question of the guiding force of the self-determination movement for last 60 years, and particularly last 3 decades, when the armed struggle started in Kashmir. So I was trying to look into this intersection of Islam and nationalism that comes to forefront when people who are engaged directly in the movement, when they speak or when they write about it, it's sometimes not clear, or sometimes it becomes as a form of debate between the notions of Islamic connotations and purely secular connotations. So that's why I was trying to look at what are the major discourses in the form of organizations that are operating in Kashmir, and I focused within Kashmir Valley 2 major organizations. One is Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, and the other is Jama'at-i-Islami. Before speaking these 2 groups, why I have taken these 2 groups? Because one, they have been active for a period of JKLF has been active for a period of 4 decades in Kashmir Valley. Jama'at-i-Islami, right from 1952, it has started as a reformatory movement and then entered into politics also, and has been engaged in this question of self-determination for a very long period of time. But more importantly, it's these two organizations have not remained just organizations. They have set up a discourse which you can find on the ground, where people do sympathize with either of the ideologies, and there are constant debates about what is the nature of self-determination movement in Kashmir. That's where I was interested in looking into and going actually do a bit of ethnographic work, and also to meet the people, the stakeholders, as well as party members, sympathizers of these two organizations, and look what they think about this whole notion and how the discourse is formed. But the debate I'm talking about is not new to Kashmir. It has, the way self-determination movement is not a post-1988 phenomena. It has a continuity right from 1930s. Similarly, the debates are not new. There has been a continuity in the debates also. If I go back a bit, the political movement which was in 1930s in Kashmir, which was a movement against the then Maharaja, the then Dogra rule, which was an autocratic rule, and there was a clearly class distinction between Maharaja and the people who were close to the Maharaja in terms of their ethnic denominations as Dogras or Rajputs, and then the other classes which were mostly peasants, which belonged to religious denomination of Islam. So the divide in 1930s was not clear, which many authors like Mridu Roy or Chitralekha Zutshi has pointed out. But my take on this is that it was not purely a kind of a religious divide. There was a class character to this movement. Why this is important for me talking to you today, because at that point of the time also, the movement, there was a debate in the movement that what is the guiding force. As it took the shape of two organizations called National Conference and Muslim Conference, where Muslim Conference was trying to locate its constituency in the form of Muslim identity, whereas National Conference was trying to put forth a platform where, other than the Muslims, Sikhs, Kashmiri Pandits, or people from other religious affinities can be also part of this struggle. So there was a clear-cut debate that whether it's a secular movement or it's a religious movement. One more important thing which is related to this movement is that the questions that were raised in 1930s movement have not stopped. If the questions of historicity, the questions of dignity, the questions of freedom, the questions of azadi, which were resonated in the slogans in 1930s, have a continuity, and people have found that in 1980s there was kind of a repetition of these slogans, and the same discourse was played. 1947, as you all are aware, that British India is partitioned, and it's two newly independent states of India and Pakistan are formed. And when these two states are formed, Kashmir as a princely state was not part of either of the state, and that it was later in October 1947 that whether one take is that there was a tribal invasion, and another take is that there wasn't help from the co-religionists across the border who came to help. But Kashmir, the partition resulted into the partition of Kashmir also. Which is still partitioned. It's not an international border, it's a line of control which divides Kashmir into two parts. One is which is Pakistan-administered Kashmir, and another is Indian-administered Kashmir. Post-1980s, post-1947 is a story of political change, constitutional change, and a lot of what in my writings, I do call it as a political manipulations that happened 1948 to 1988. Though a lot of authors have written that this was a period of normalcy in Kashmir, everything happened smoothly, elections happened, bureaucracy was working smoothly. But if I look at clearly, there was kind of there was a manipulation that was happening through electoral politics, which was more a process of selection than an election. and a lot of change, constitutional and political change happened, which was kind of as an attempt to integrate Kashmir fully and finally into the Indian Union. But this period also saw a continuous resistance in the form of different religious, political, and social groups, which were not so much visible, but there was a resistance. So my point take here is that there has been a continuous resistance right from 1948. 1988 is kind of a turning point, as the resistance took a different shape and it was an armed struggle. Here, today's talk is focused on post-1988 discourses, where I'm trying to look at the repetition of this debate of what is the guiding force. 1988, one of the organizations which I'm looking at is Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, which is called as JKLF. Though it was formed in 1960s in what we call as Azad Kashmir or Pakistan administered Kashmir, but formally it took shape here in UK in 1977. Formally, it was formed in United Kingdom, and it was only in 1986 and 87 that it came to limelight in Kashmir Valley. And post 1986, for some years, all over it was the slogans, the march, the support, the mass movements in favor of JKLF. Why JKLF was able to garner this much of mass support is one, because of its ideology, and second, it was one of the first organizations which came out publicly calling that there is a need to call for a self-determination movement, and it was an armed struggle. It was kind of different from all those movements which were preceded JKLF. JKLF came with this notion that Kashmir is a nation, and it's a nation at par with Pakistan and India. Their main focus was on Kashmiri nationalism, while they focused on historical memories, socio-cultural values, traditions, which cut across ethnicities and language, and that is kind of a formulation of Kashmiri nationalism for them. For some years, even the term Kashmiriyat was used for this nationalism, where they tried to see that Kashmiriyat is a platform where people from different ethnicities, language, and religion, they can come to this platform and come for the struggle of self-determination, and which is a struggle against Indian state. But over the years, now I was talking to some of the members recently, they do not use this word Kashmiriyat, and one of the reasons is that it has been taken up by the state now. State so much uses this word Kashmiriyat in order to prove that Kashmiriyat is kind of a sub-nationalism and it's a part of the larger Indian nationalism, where now the pro-self-determination groups are very much apprehensive in using this word. Nevertheless, they call the self-determination movement as a liberation movement. As a liberation movement for the end goal of secular and democratic independent Kashmir, a united Kashmir which was before 1947. And a lot of questions have been put forth about the politics of JKLF, that is it really a secular group? The nationalism which they are talking about, doesn't it have Islamic connotations? Which is actually the larger debate in the notion of secularism in South Asia. How do you define secularism? Is it purely a Western concept of defining differentiation between religion and politics, or is it in a different way, where religion in South Asia is defined in a different way? It's kind of an everyday experience of a human being. It's not so clear-cut of distinguishing politics from the religion. So if you look at the politics of JKLF, in their words, in their writings, they do call for a secular republic. They call for a secularism. But when you look into the practices of JKLF, it doesn't purely fix to this Western notion of secularism. They do agree that there is a role of Islam in the movement, and there has been always a role of Islam in terms of the mobilization. But why they make a difference from other Islamist groups is that they do not define Islam as an ideology, but Islam just as a tradition, as a faith, as a way of living. They do not define Islam as a cross-national identifier, while they can seek the alliances from other Muslims across the world. And they also talk about pluralism within Islam, that there can be different schools of thought within Islam. There is lived experiences, there is a lived Islam in Kashmir. There is not so much emphasis on scriptural Islam. And when you talk to them about what will be the way out, because a lot of people are talking about how this age-old Kashmir dispute will be solved, and is there a roadmap for solving this? While looking at their documents and even talking to the leaders like Yasin Malik and others who are right now in the party politics there, they do believe that there should be a UN resolution. There are around 15 resolutions on Kashmir, and they talk about that there should be a plebiscite. But other than this, they have also checked out a roadmap for this, while they say that the first step towards solving the Kashmir problem is unification of Kashmir across LOC. There should be one Kashmir. There should not be two Kashmirs. The second point they talk about is that there should be the political groups from India, Pakistan, and Kashmir under some international intervention. They should come to a common platform where they should discuss, they should carve out a way. And the carve out way for what? They don't kind of, it's not undefined for them. They define it and they say that the way is that it should be a secular and a democratic independent Kashmir, which is kind of a united Kashmir as it was before princely state. If I was looking at the old document of National Conference, which is one of the political groups, which is right from 1930s there, they also have a similar document where they talk about unification of Kashmir, autonomy, economic and political powers. But when you look at the ideology of National Conference, they do not go beyond the autonomy. They think that Kashmiri nationalism is just a sub-nationalism. It's not a nationalism at par with Pakistan as well as par with India. So that's why there's a difference between JKLF's notion of secular nationalism and that of National Conference. Before I go forward and talk about the politics of JKLF, I want to quickly draw kind of a comparison with Jama'at-i-Islami. As I already told you, that Jama'at-i-Islami is kind of an offshoot of Jama'at-i-Islami, which was formed in British India in 1941. And the partition happened, and the partition of Jama'at-i-Islami also happened. There was Jama'at-i-Islami Hind, Jama'at-i-Islami Pakistan. Till 1952, Jama'at-i-Islami of Kashmir was part of Jama'at-i-Islami Hind. In 1952, they differentiated and they formed Jama'at-i-Islami of Kashmir of its own, and the reason was Kashmir. Because Jama'at-i-Islami Kashmir has a stand that Kashmir is a disputed territory and it needs to be solved through plebiscite, or it needs to be solved through a due process, whereas Jama'at-i-Islami Hind is kind of an, it has an idea that Kashmir is part of India, and the final version have to be with this also. Jama'at-i-Islami, largely its ideology is based on the writings of the ideologue of Jama'at-i-Islami, Maulana Maududi. Even if you talk to the members of any member, which they call as Rukun in Kashmir, they will quote you Maududi while talking about anything on politics, on social life, or economics. So the writings of Maududi are so much influencing in the writings which are happening right now from Jama'at-i-Islami. One major focus of Jama'at-i-Islami is that there is no distinction between religion and politics. With this presumption, they have a take on self-determination movement in Kashmir also, where they say that this is clearly a religious movement. It's a religious movement of Kashmiri Muslims against Indian state. And they do not believe in Kashmiri nationalism. They have the idea of the emphasis on the idea of Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the concept of brotherhood all across the world of Muslims, where they say that the concepts like Kashmiri nationalism is antithesis to the whole Islamic concept of Ikhwan. So it's sin and the nationalism, which they call as Watan Parasti, they say that it is going to divide Muslims and it's not going to help or solve any problem, be it a Kashmir problem or any problem across the world. So their basic premise is that we cannot distinguish between politics and religion. So how can we distinguish, how can not we bring Islam into this moment? And when they talk about historicity, it's interesting to see that there is a distinction of the historicity also between JKLF and Jama'at-i-Islami. When JKLF is talking about the historicity, the historical line in Kashmir for JKLF is divided between Kashmiri rulers and non-Kashmiri rulers. But for Jama'at-i-Islami, it's a distinction between Muslim rulers and non-Muslim rulers. So for JKLF, Mughals, Afghans, Sikhs, Dogras, and now the Indian state, as well as Pakistan, are the outsiders. It's for JKLF. But for Jamaat-Islami, Mughals are not outsiders. Afghans are not outsiders. Sikh rule is problematic. Dogra rule is problematic. Now Indian rule is problematic, not the rule across the border of Pakistan. So there is a clear-cut division in terms of the ideas which is reflected in the politics of both the groups also. In terms of the armed struggle, JKLF in 1988 took a lead in the armed struggle, and it was, I was looking at the old documents which I got from their offices, the Urdu translations of Mao and Che Guevara, which the cadres of JKLF used to read in 1986-87 when the armed struggle was starting. So one can get a sense that what was the idea of this armed struggle. Nevertheless, in Kashmir, in the local dialect or in local language, everyone who was with armed struggle was termed as Mujahid. And or the term, neutral term of militant was used, but mostly it was Mujahid. And JKLF itself used to say that their cadres are the Mujahid. But it was not kind of a clear-cut connotation of that the Mujahids are in the process of jihad. But the cadres who are fighting against the Indian state were referred as Mujahid. But if you look at Jamaat-Islami's discourse of self-determination, there is the connotation, clear-cut connotation of jihad, where they say that it's a religious war which is for the sake of God. And the Mujahids are those who are waging this jihad. And if you look at the distinction in terms of the politics, how the politics on the ground was played, both the groups for some period of time were part of the Hurriyat conference, which was kind of a larger amalgam of most of the political parties, pro-self-determination groups in Kashmir. But it led the political differences on what is the guiding force, whether people do want independent Kashmir or they want an alliance with Pakistan. That led to the division of the Hurriyat conference also, and JKLF also came out of Hurriyat conference. JKLF had also differences with the Islamist groups like Jamaat-Islami on the social dictates which came in their writings or which came in the newspaper articles about the dress code. One of the confrontations that happened in early 1991 was JKLF confronting one of the Islamist groups which was supported by Jamaat-Islami called Allah Tigers, which came with an kind of a clear-cut statement that how the Muslim girls have to dress up. Whereas to confront this, there was a clear-cut statement from one of the leaders, Amanullah Khan of JKLF, that this movement is not a religious movement, and people from all sects, religious lines are welcomed for this movement, and these dictates like dress code are going to be disastrous for this movement. So there were tussles in between the different ideologies and different groups. And one of the biggest confrontation that happened on ground between these two ideologies was a confrontation between Hizbul Mujahideen and JKLF. Hizbul Mujahideen was a frontal organization of Jama'at-i-Islami till 1997. Hizbul Mujahideen is today also active, very much active in Kashmir. But Jama'at-i-Islami has dissociated from 1997 with it. But till 1997, it was kind of Jama'at-i-Islami claimed that this is the frontal organization of Jama'at-i-Islami. The questions of nationalism, the questions of Islamic Republic, the questions of whether it's a jihad or whether it's a national liberation, it resulted into the confrontation between the two groups. And in 1993 to 1995, there was direct confrontation between the two groups, which led to the killings of a lot of cadres from both the groups. Now, if you talk to the people from Jamaat-Islami as well as JKLF, they do talk about it. They say that there were the differences, but then they shift the goal towards the Indian agencies. When they say that it was the whole was cooked up by Indian agencies, they were responsible for this whole confrontation. But one cannot deny the fact that the self-determination movement in Kashmir is not a monolith. There are different voices. There are different discourses within the movement. And the differences between Jamaat-Islami and JKLF, one can see that there is a competition between the two ideologies on cultural and political spaces also. How one is trying to gain the different constituencies in Kashmir, particularly in Kashmir Valley, how one is making the public appearance, who is controlling which shrine or mosque, which was in 1930s also, and it still continues. There is also this notion of that how close or how far are you from Pakistan? Pakistan has played an important role in the movement right from 1947. One way of looking at it is that it's kind of a neighbor, which is a typical modern nation state, which is fishing in the troubled waters and which wants to take an advantage. Another way of looking at it as is that Kashmir is a disputed region between the two nations, so Pakistan has to play a part of it. And the another version, which is that which has led to a lot of questions, that being Pakistan there, does it also question the movement? Is the movement in Kashmir really indigenous? Or is it kind of in which Indian state always claims does it always have a foreign hand? There is no clear-cut answer to this, but no doubt the Pakistan has always played a part. But always shifting the goalpost towards Pakistan is actually taking away the agency of Kashmiri people, as they are drum driving cattle and somebody else is dictating the terms for them. So there has been the notion of indigenous movement in Kashmir. Now for JKLF, Pakistan has been in 1988 friends, 1993 onwards foes, and somewhere in between now, sometimes in talking terms, sometimes recognizing the importance of Pakistan and sometimes distancing itself. But for Jamaat-Islami, it has been always a close friend or close associate, because the premise of this movement for Jamaat-Islami is that the genesis of the movement is two nations theory. So if any solution for Kashmir from Jamaat-Islami's point of view, it has to be bringing back two nations theory, where Muslim dominated areas should directly go to Pakistan, and Kashmir being one, the natural result is that Kashmir should be part of Pakistan. Where JKLF is distancing itself from this kind of an ideology, where they say that Kashmir from both sides should be unified, and it has to have the independence from both the countries. And it's not only in terms of the ideologies, or it's not only limited to the cadres and the members of these two groups. One can see these differences on the public gatherings or on the mass rallies, where one can see there is a contestation in terms of the slogans also, where the slogan "Hum kya chahte azadi," what do we want, freedom, and then afterwards it's either Pakistan se rishta kya, or it is is par bhi lenge azadi, us par bhi lenge azadi. We will take freedom from both sides. So one can see that on ground there is this contestation happening on the everyday. Though it doesn't lead to kind of a violence between the groups as it happened in 94 to 95, but these debates are often happening on social media, on newspaper articles, or through speeches of leaders of either of the groups. So these debates are continuing there. In terms of the violence, JKLF in 1995 declared unilateral ceasefire, and from 1995 onwards, JKLF is a political movement. It's not an armed movement, but Jama'at-i-Islami continues. Jama'at-i-Islami not as an organization is an armed movement, but it continues to support the armed groups, particularly Hizbul Mujahideen. So it says that the movement, one of the manifestations of the movement has to be the armed struggle, and Hizbul Mujahideen is doing it, and we are in favor of Hizbul Mujahideen. Though it has distanced itself as an organization from it, but ideologically it supports the armed struggle in Kashmir. The other questions which are often raised within the movement, and which brings us this question of Islam and nationalism there. One interesting question is about the question of the gender. How far the two organizations are representing different genders? Is there a representation of women in either of the groups, or what is their take on the role of women in the movement? There is kind of a similarity between the two groups. JKLF has some women as members, but when you talk to them about the role in terms of the leadership, in terms of the council, or in terms of the closed group, there are no members who are part of the decision making or who take any decisions in the meetings. For Jamaat-Islami, the members are called as a rukun, and it's the constitution of the Jamaat-Islami says that the male members is only restricted to the males, and women are called as the sympathizers only. So they can be sympathizers of the movement of Jamaat-Islami, but they cannot become the members. And when you question to the leaders as well as cadres about what is your take on the role of the woman, the answer from both the groups is that women have played an important role in the movement from 1930s. They have been in the processions. They have been in they have taken care of the injured, if there are any injured, or they have taken important role. They have been the victims of the violence. So the woman as a victim, as a survivor, as a martyr's mother, as a martyr's sister, that is kind of an notion that is coming forward from both the groups. But if we look from the larger perspective, one needs to look the role of the woman in the societies in South Asia from a different perspective, rather from a Western feminist perspective. Whether the women in Kashmir have an agency or not, will we take the same prism as the Western feminism takes, that whether they play an important role in decision making, or should there be some other way of looking into the role of the woman? But nevertheless, in these two organizations, women have not come forward. They have not playing an important role. In terms of what is the negotiation, or what is the conversation that is happening between these two movements and Indian state, there is also a difference. JKLF as it started as an armed group, there has been always a confrontation between Indian state and JKLF. They speak totally, Indian state as well as and JKLF speak totally different vocabulary. For JKLF, Indian state is a foreign occupation, it's a foreign rule. For Indian state, JKLF's ideology is null and void. There is no self-determination movement. So it's a question of either autonomy or it's a question of law and order. So under these objectives, there has been always a confrontation between JKLF and Indian state. Though post 1999, there have been negotiations that happened between the regimes that were ruling in India and the Hurriyat, or when JKLF was a part of Hurriyat, JKLF was part of the negotiations that happened between Indian state and the pro-Azadi groups in Kashmir. Whereas if you look at Jamaat-i-Islami, starting as a reformative movement, it was not in a confrontation from the very beginning with the Indian state, because it started with a reformative movement. It was just a reformative movement. And then it started the mushrooming of schools also. There were a lot of schools run by Jamaat-i-Islami, where both secular and Islamic teachings will be given to the students. These schools were also under the state government. The state government did not stop the mushrooming of schools of Jamaat-i-Islami. So till 1970s, even post 1970s, the members of Jamaat-i-Islami actually fought elections, and they were the member of the Kashmiri Assembly also. And so they fought elections under Indian Constitution. So there was not a clear-cut, a direct confrontation that was happening between Indian state and Jamaat-i-Islami. But in terms of their writings or in terms of their rhetorics that was happening, they talked about self-determination. They talked about plebiscite. I was looking into the old copies of the journal called Azan, which is published, still published in Kashmir from Jamaat-i-Islami. It's a monthly magazine which comes from Jamaat-i-Islami. I was looking into the 1974 and 76 issues when one of the ideologues, Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, he was a member of parliament, member of Kashmir Assembly, and he fought an election. He was there, and I was trying to look what was he talking, and there were certain speeches in which were published, which he gave in the assembly. And it was amazing to see that within the assembly, this man is talking about self-determination within the Kashmiri Assembly. Because Jamaat-i-Islami right now, the take for elections for Jamaat-i-Islami is that elections are also un-Islamic. It's an antithesis to Islam. There should be a complete boycott of elections, which is JKLF also stands for that, but they do not bring Islamic connotations. They say that we cannot have elections because it's a disputed region, so elections are null and void. But when people question back to Jamaat-i-Islami that if it is sin in 1990 onwards to be part of elections, why Jamaat-i-Islami fought elections in 1970s? How it was not sin in 1970s? Then the reply which you get from different cadres and as well as leaders is that within the assembly also, Jamaat-i-Islami actually stood for the similar goals. It talked about revival of Islam, Islamic schools, self-determination, but still there is a big question mark on Jamaat vis-a-vis elections, which is kind of sometimes when there's a debate between JKLF and Jamaat-Islami and there are counter allegations, there are questions, there are debates, that question of elections is also brought to limelight. Now, talking about this comparison, it's interesting to see that there are certain political as well as cultural spaces where you do not see any difference between the two organizations, where the two groups, the two discourses or two ideologies stand at one place. First is the notion of what is the nature of Kashmir dispute. For both the organizations, they call it as a disputed region. For both the regions, for both the organizations, they call there should be some resolution to this, though they talk about different end goals, but both of the organizations recognize that this is a disputed region. Secondly, there is the importance that is given to UN resolutions by both the organizations. That's also kind of an amazing. Both the organizations talk about UN resolutions, and they talk in terms of the state, the secular notion of modern nation state. Because JKLF, when they talk about the end goal of their struggle, they say that we will be forming independent, democratic Kashmir as a nation state. And when Jama'at-i-Islami talks about the end product, though they say that it's an Islamic movement, it's an Islamic resistance, but when they talk about end product, it's again alliance with the Pakistan, which is also a state, which is a modern concept. So there is kind of an different ways why the two groups are standing together. And there have been a lot of movements from 2000 onwards, like 2008 land acquisition movement, which was kind of a land given to the Amarnath Trust, and there was big agitation in Kashmir. The two groups came together, and though they acquired ideological differences, but they fought together this agitation. They were together. They were seen on sharing the platforms, giving the common statements, and giving the common plans for the shutdowns or hartals or the calendars for the protest movements. In 2010, again, when there was again a mass movement in Kashmir and people were on roads, when there were around 110 young boys were killed on the streets of Srinagar and other towns by Indian paramilitary forces. At that time also there was a big agitation, and people, both the groups came together and they were on the same platform. Recently in 2016, when again the big agitation happened, again they were seen together. And I was just reading today's paper. It's called as a joint resistance group, which they call it now. Together they have given a call for strike on coming 9th and 11th, which is Afzal Guru Day and Maqbool birthday. So on certain occasions, on certain cultural space and political spaces, you can see that both the groups are coming together. Nevertheless, there are sharp differences which sometimes result in kind of an violence, and sometimes there is also a chaos, and there is sometimes when the people do ask that how the negotiations will happen in Kashmir. Who will, if the pro-self-determination groups are the real representatives in Kashmir, who is going to represent on the negotiation table? Is it the secular group or is it the Islamist group? With these words, I'll stop here.
Well, thank you very much indeed for a very clear, lucid explanation and discussion of these two major strands, but also the extent to which they, as you said, at the end, come together in certain practical terms, but have clear visions at the same time. We will probably have one or two questions online as well, but I'll throw it open to the audience in just a moment. But if I could take the chairman's privilege of asking the first question and go back to something you said at the beginning, which was to emphasize the class dimension of the national conference or in the 1930s. Is it possible, in your view, to distinguish socially between the type of young man, mainly young men, I'm sure, who become activists in JKLF and those who become activists in the Jama'at-i-Islami?
The social base for the two organizations is different. One can make a clear-cut distinction that why the cadres are coming from both the organizations. One important thing that happened in 1952 in Kashmir was the land reforms, which changed kind of the political economy in Kashmir, and which led to different dimensions of the class characters. National Conference, for a very larger part of the time, had a social base in the rural areas. But when they could not address the question of Kashmir politically, and post 1977, when one of the biggest leaders of National Conference, Sheikh Abdullah, at last gave up the fight of self-determination, people, even in the rural areas, were not satisfied with the politics of National Conference. So there was a vacuum. And this vacuum was used by Jama'at-i-Islami, where through their schools and through their madrasas or their programs which they conduct monthly programs in different parts, they were able to grapple that vacuum, and they were able to gain that social base, which was actually the social base for National Conference. For JKLF, the social base was mostly urban, where students, lawyers, journalists became part of the cadres of JKLF, and then as sympathizers. But now, post 2000, there's kind of a totally a different turn, where which is kind of a changing nature of the self-determination movement in Kashmir, where due to the lot of human rights violations and atrocities which are coming from the Indian state, people are again pushed towards the religious identity, where they take refuge in the religious identity. And the vantage point or the expression of this is formed in the form of the ideology of Jama'at-i-Islami, where now Jama'at-i-Islami has found its membership even in the urban centers also. That's why one of the ideologues, Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, who was till 99, he was kind of his social base was around Baramulla or Sopore. Now the whole base has shifted to Srinagar, where even in the important towns and cities like Srinagar, there has been an increased membership of Jama'at-i-Islami.
Okay, lots and lots and lots of questions. Please wait for the microphone to come. And because there are so many wanting to ask questions, I ask you to keep your questions as succinct as possible. Well, let's start in the front and then we'll go to the back. And we may have to group the questions depending how they go. So.
Thank you for your presentation. Khalid Nadeem, Citation Middle East Forum. Can you tell us a bit about I'm very interested about the funding for Jama'at-i-Islami and JKL. How much funding do you think they actually get from Pakistan? How much funding do you think they get from other state actors and say from Muslims in India itself? I mean, without proper funding, they can't do so much. And also, how do you see the stalemate? I mean, I know you suggested there's going to be, the parties are saying a unification. Practically, I mean, we're not going to see that. I mean, how do you see both states breaking the stalemate? Because otherwise, this is just going to continue the way it is at the moment for another 10, 20 years. So how do you break this stalemate?
Two questions there, really. Okay. Yeah.
Both the organizations actually deny of any external funding, and it's kind of this question is apt in a time when there have been a lot of raids by National Investigation Agency in Kashmir, but not only members of these two groups have been taken away, but even the PhD scholars, university teachers have been picked up by Indian agencies, blaming that they have some source of funding coming externally, and why what the term is hawala money is coming via these people to these organizations. Both organizations deny that there is any kind of an external funding, but in their discussions, Jama'at-i-Islami talks about that there is some kind of funding. They don't use the term funding. Some kind of help that comes usually from the people in Middle East, and there is also some religious organizations and social organizations in Kashmir across the border, Muzaffarabad, where they raise funding in mosques and other places, and that is actually the source of funding. And within Kashmir also, actually, in their monthly programs, which they call as ijtimas, there is a process of funding that happens. There is kind of people members as well as those who come to their programs, they do give some kind of an funding which is publicly kind of which is very transparent, which they make publicly transparent. That is actually the source of funding. But that might not be the only funding, because looking at how the infrastructure Jama'at-i-Islami is holding in across Kashmir as well as in regions of Jammu, my hunch is that there might be external source of funding also for them. But for JKLF, till 1991 it was completely supported by Pakistan. But post 1991, when there was a larger mass support for JKLF with the slogan that it has to be an independent Kashmir, the policy of Pakistan towards JKLF altogether changed. So there was so much of support for JKLF as an organization. So JKLF was in between Pakistan as well as India. It was fighting war on both sides. The major sources which actually JKLF has been using is the funds that it raised in different programs within Kashmir. But for example, in 1996, one of the leaders called Javed Mir, he was arrested, and the allegations that was made that he was arrested with the money that he was carrying from Delhi to Kashmir. So there have been certain incidents where people have raised this question whether the source of JKLF is also across the border or it's some other places. But they do also say that the funding is purely indigenous. And when they talk about indigenous, they say this side of the Kashmir we raise funds, and our friends from other side across the border, which they say is also a Kashmir, it's not Pakistan, it's a Kashmir only, we get funds from both sides of the Kashmir.
So they must be getting money from Dubai, I suppose.
Sorry?
Dubai, I mean,
From the
people in
diaspora,
Dubai.
yeah. Okay, there's a question at the
I
back.
have two questions. Thank you very much, first of all, for your very good presentation. This is one of the areas on which I work as well. The first question is regarding the stalemate. One of the conference attendants has just made a point about, a question. He asked a question. My question is about an aspect of that. Do you think that there are some differences because of which there is this stalemate, differences between Liberation Front and Jama'at-i-Islami, because of which there is stalemate? What are the exact differences? I would like to know what are the exact differences between Jama'at-i-Islami and Liberation Front, Kashmir Liberation Front, because of which stalemate is happening. And the other thing is about the similarities. You said that there are some similarities between these two fronts, basically these movements, in terms of their political view. And then you mentioned the UN resolution on disputed status of Kashmir. So, and then you said that there are some cultural spaces as well, which they share, but you did not give an example of that. Could you give us an example of that, please?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, can I?
No. We'll after this answer, then we'll come to you.
Yes.
As far as stalemate is concerned, it's not mostly because of the differences within the self-determination. It's mostly by how the two states, India and Pakistan, are behaving right now, or have been behaving from last 3 decades. On the one side, there is kind of a clear-cut denial from Indian state that there is a problem. So they do not even recognize that there is a problem. So they cannot fetch the solution when they do not have a problem in hand. So they say that it's a law and order problem. But if you look at the agreements of 1960s Tashkent, Shimla Agreement, or the Agra Summit that had happened, that actually recognized that Indian state somewhere recognized that this is a dispute which needs to be solved, and there is some serious negotiations has to happen between India and Pakistan to solve this issue. But over the years, no serious initiative has been made by the regimes on either side. The regimes on the both sides seem to play with for the galleries when they bring the Kashmir question, that they are going to solve it or there is no Kashmir question at all. And the international pressure or international intervention, which was right in 1950s, 1960s because of the Cold War, that too is also now shifting. So there is kind of Kashmir is not the pressing question in the international arena right now, the way it is Palestine is, the way right now the Syria is. So there is kind of the international media or international agencies have also distanced itself. So there are actually multiple causes for this stalemate. And the differences between the two, I don't think that the differences can be the reason for the stalemate, because actually both the groups which I talked about, the similarity is that they both say that there should be a negotiation. There should be a negotiation, and the difference only between the two groups is that they say that it's not a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan, it is a trilateral. The people from Kashmir have to be part of this negotiation. So actually they are in a process actually to break the stalemate, not kind of becoming an obstacle for this. In terms of the differences in their political and cultural spaces, is that how do they talk to the public gathering, or how do they make their programs visible? For JKLF, they are not only confined to the mosques or shrines, though they do use those spaces. But Jama'at-i-Islami is confined only to dargahs, masjids and mosques for the propagation of their ideas or even giving political statements. But JKLF has kind of elaborated these spaces. For example, in 2006, JKLF had a large program of signature campaign where it collected 1.5 million signatures across the villages from the people. Similarly, sometimes it's a blood donation camp. Sometimes it's kind of even in villages there, which I personally witnessed, there was kind of a street theater, which they performed, which in Kashmiri we call as bandagation. The bands play the role of Indian state, Pakistan, and how the Kashmiri is being region in between. So the role play. So they take these cultural different spaces for propagation of their ideas, whereas Jama'at-i-Islami is not. An important thing to see here is when I was saying that Jama'at-i-Islami and people in general use mosques for political propagation. For an outsider, which many of my friends, Indian friends who write about Kashmir, they say that Valley is turning fundamentalist. More people are attending mosques. But if you look closely, when you choke down the secular spaces where you can discuss, debate, and do discussions on political issues, when there are no spaces left, there are only mosques and shrines, when people do go to the mosque to discuss even the political issue, it's actually the sacred space is turning into a political space, rather than people turning into fundamentalists or radicals going to mosques. So there is kind of an internal, how one can see from the inside what's happening inside.
Yes, I've got two issues. One is the...
Just the microphone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Two issues. One is that of regions. Maybe you often use the term Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, you've got Jammu, Kashmir, Ladakh, and maybe some other areas as well. I want you to comment on that. Also, what is the role of the Hindus in this whole movement?
Can I just add to that? Because my question is overlaps that. So I wanted to ask about the narrative of citizenship that the people in Kashmir or young people in Kashmir are exposed to in state curriculum through state education, and what is the impact of the rise of right-wing Hindutva on the current citizenship narrative?
Thank you. Okay.
Kashmir Valley is only one of the regions which I was talking today. There are 5 different regions in Kashmir, which Jammu, Kashmir Valley, Ladakh, Gilgit-Baltistan, and what is called as Mirpur Muzaffarabad together, what some people refer as Azad Kashmir or Pakistan Administered Kashmir. So there are 5 different regions, and 3 regions are on Indian side, Ladakh, Jammu and Kashmir Valley. 2 regions on our other side, Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Kashmir. So when one looks at the moment, mostly when my research is kind of focused on Kashmir Valley, which is kind of it's not a deliberate negation to that the existence of other regions and other voices. There are differences in the political imagination of these different regions. For example, in Jammu, people in Jammu have always talked about discrimination that has happened to them because people from Kashmir Valley have been the rulers. All the chief ministers have been from the Kashmir Valley. So in terms of the development, in terms of the government services, they have been always neglected. In Ladakh, the same narration is there, that Ladakh has been neglected by both Jammu as well as Kashmir. And there has been also the demand of autonomous hill council, which was given to them in 1996 to Ladakh, that they needed autonomous hill council. They need an autonomy within JNK. JNK has an autonomy in terms of Article 370, but Ladakh needs more autonomy because they are culturally, religiously distinct, and they need to preserve their cultural identity. So they need more developmental programs. So they need more autonomous. And if you look at regions of Gilgit-Baltistan, Gilgit-Baltistan is itself kind of consists of multiple ethnic groups. There are Baltis, there are people who speak Shina language, there are people who are Gujars, who speak Pahari language. So it's a mix of different ethnicities. And Mirpur and Muzaffarabad, in Mirpur, there are Punjabi speaking people. And in Muzaffarabad, there are Kashmiri speaking people. So in terms of the language, in terms of ethnicities, these regions represent different ethnography. And when we talk about JKLF as well as Jama'at-i-Islami, their political map doesn't match the ethnographic map. They claim, JKLF claims that it's a representative of whole JNK. JNK has to be independent. But when you look on the practical, on the ground, they do not have a support in Jammu and in Ladakh. They have a support in Mirpur, they have a support in Muzaffarabad, and some support in Gilgit-Baltistan, but not in Jammu and Ladakh. Similarly, is the case of Jama'at-i-Islami. But then, if you look at the history of freedom struggles all across the world, there has been this distinction. The political map and ethnographic map doesn't match. For example, Indian National Congress in India claimed that it represents the whole British India, but it was not representing Dalits, it was not representing Muslims, it was not representing tribals. So there is a mismatch what you claim as a political map and what is originally an ethnographic map. Same is the problem in Kashmir. Then there has been also, post-1990s onwards, there has been a polarization that is happening, particularly Jammu versus Kashmir Valley. And which, ma'am, I'll come to your question is,
Hindus.
I'm coming to that question also. The role of BJP, particularly post-2014 when they came to power in India, and now they are a coalition partners in Kashmir also, they had played this polarization card while they play this card of that Jammu Hindus will be saved from the Muslims of Kashmir by BJP. So if you look at the results of elections that had happened in the recent assembly elections, all the seats in Jammu are won by BJP. They did not win any seat in Kashmir Valley, and PDP and National Conference could not win seat in Jammu. So there was a complete electoral result. Was a complete result of a complete polarization: Hindu Jammu, Muslim Kashmir. So which is a kind of a dangerous turn, which it's kind of and it will be actually adding to the stalemate what we are looking for any possible solution. As far as Hindus are concerned, there are different groups of Hindus that live in JNK. In Jammu, the Dogras, which are by religious denomination Hindus, are from different castes. In Kashmir Valley, the Hindus, which are called as Kashmiri Pandits, they are only from one caste, that's Brahmins. In Ladakh, there is a small proportion of Hindu population, but mostly it's Buddhist. But largely, the role of Kashmiri Pandits has been in the movement in 1930s, when there was a movement against Maharaja. But most of them were actually landholders. So there was a not only difference between Muslims versus Kashmiri Pandits, it was a class distinction. Kashmiri Muslims were lower class, Kashmiri Pandits were upper class. So there was a class distinction also between the two. And over the years, over these years, when people, because a lot of people, when they write about Kashmiri Pandits, they say that there was a beautiful relation between Kashmiri Pandits and Muslims. And one fine morning in 1988, somebody came with a gun and this relation was spoiled. But there was a good relation between Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims, but it was not really a beautiful relation. There were political differences. There were, they recognized their religious differences. It was not a syncretic Islam or syncretic religion that was being followed. P.N. Madan, a sociologist from India, he writes in his dissertation, Family and Ancestors of Kashmiri Pandits, he writes that the relation between Kashmiri Pandits and Muslims was similar as the Brahmins in other parts of India have with the lower castes. Because in Kashmir Valley there were no lower castes, so all the so-called menial jobs were done by Kashmiri Muslims. So that was the nature of relation. It was a relation of dependence. It was not a relation of kind of a coexistence and lovingly living it together. So there were social and political differences, but then it came to more limelight post 1988 because Kashmiri Pandits, which are very much part of the Kashmir Valley, but in terms of their politics, they stand with this notion that Kashmir has to be part of India. And 1990s, which is important to mention, which I might have missed in my presentation, is an important question of Kashmiri Pandit migration that happened in 1991, which Kashmiri Pandits do not call as migration, they call it as a forced displacement. There are multiple narrations why it happened. But the important question is that even right now, after 25, 26 years of this migration, this question is still resonating in the valley, where every political group, Jama'at-i-Islami JKLF, distances itself from that they do not have any role in the migration of Kashmiri Pandits, which kind of actually tries to bring it to a larger question because they are addressing Kashmiri Muslims, where they are saying to Kashmiri Muslims that we are not responsible. So it actually talks about larger similar framework, fabric of Kashmiri society.
Okay, please.
Hi, Khalid. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very rare that we get to hear from researchers who are not just working in Kashmir, but also living there and have grown up there. So I have a couple of questions, Collins. Even today, if you go and put in YouTube Maqbool Bhatt, you get to hear a voice clip of Maqbool Bhatt addressing the rally, in which he's clearly talking about an ideology which is leftist and talks about class and talks about a secular democratic nation. My question to you is that how far has today's JKLF moved from that ideology of Maqbool Bhatt? That's the first question. You beautifully trace the history of the whole movement from 1930s till now, and how JKLF was taken over by HM, and how there was a contestation and conflict between the two ideologies largely. The second question would be, from your ethnographic observations in Kashmir, because you talked about little bit about 2016, and then you went in 1930s, 40s, but I don't think there was time enough to come back to 16. But I would prompt you there. I would want to know from your ethnographic observations in 2016 particularly, where does the youth lean towards mostly now in Kashmir? Which ideology? And is there a threat, or is there something for us as researchers and Kashmiri people to fare, because maybe there's a possibility of a pan-Islamic Khilafat movement, which is sadly becoming global now. I'm using sadly with my subjectivity, yeah. So do you think there is a possibility of Kashmiri youth kind of leaning onto that? Because we have seen black ISIS flags being waved by protesters in Kashmir, and when asked, the parties say that, oh, it's just to irritate the Indian state. And then one last question, as a researcher who's working particularly on gender in Kashmir, It's very interesting that when it comes to adopting Western notions of democracy, modern nation, and even the debates of self-determination, our society has no issues with that. But when it comes to the understanding of women, their empowerment, their role in decision-making, the same voice dies out and questions, is this really relevant to Kashmir? Shall we have a different version of feminism? Oh, this doesn't apply. Does democracy apply? Does self-determination apply? Do all these things apply? And feminism or equality? Because difference is often seen as inequality, as we know in feminism. So a different version of feminism in Kashmir, people advocate for that, researchers advocate for that. I would prompt you and try to know from you, did you speak to Zamruda Habib or Asian Rabi, who are the women leaders within the movement? My own research, I don't know if you would be interested, but my own research in Kashmir, my interaction with Zamruda Habib revealed that she started a social movement, but since there was no one to listen to her, she joined the amalgam of Hurriyat in 90s just to get a bigger platform. But what happened as a result was that, one, her voice disappeared among the male voices, because in 29 organizations which come under the umbrella of Hurriyat, she is the head, the only female head of one of the factions, and there is no other female member in that leadership position, if that would be called leadership position, because nobody has her voice. That is one. And another, she told me, interestingly, just one last point, she told me interestingly that she is an educated woman, she was a teacher, she started a movement, but today she's alone, she's diabetic, she's not married. All the leaders in separatist movements are married to young, beautiful, educated women. Why did society discard her? Did you get to inquire that? I'm not sure you would have, but just making the point. Thank you.
Okay. It's big questions.
You won't be able to cover all that.
First, Maqbool Bhatt. For the audience here, Maqbool Bhatt was one of the founders of JKLF, who was hanged in 1984 in Tihar jail, and his body was also buried in Tihar jail, where now the jail authorities have made a building. There's an office on his grave, because they thought that he is such a powerful figure in terms of the ideas. He will be kind of a source of inspiration for the young generation in Kashmir, which they were very true, which he has become. Maqbool Bhatt, which you very well said, and I have kind of when I visited his home in Trahgam in Kupwara, his mother was sharing some literature which she got from one of the cadres who came across, who he had written some letters. So I was looking at that literature also, and this YouTube video also. He clearly speaks about Kashmiri nationalism. He talks about the class character of the movement, how the peasants, how the people from agricultural background, they are important for this revolution. And he talks in terms of, he uses the terms revolution, movement, revolt, patriarchy, authority. These are the terminologies which he uses. But if you look 1990 onwards, for some years, the ideology of JKLF was actually kind of, and they were taking Maqbool Bhatt's inspiration very seriously. And one of the reasons was that it was a combined JKLF. Even the Amanullah Khan, who was a close associate of JKLF, he was the chairman of JKLF. But post 1992, there was a change in the leadership in JKLF, and there was a change in the politics also. So there was more towards kind of a leaning towards using religion for the mobilization purposes. Though they are not saying that they JKLF used religion for the ideology, but even for using it for the mobilization was a clear-cut shift from what Maqbool Bhatt stood for. Maqbool Bhatt's vision was much more broader, much more inclusive, which actually JKLF somewhere have compromised. 2016 was an important year, and in many ways, kind of, and it led to many changes, and it brought many things to think about. And particularly about the youth, I'm sure that you might be aware that after the killing of one of the militant leaders, Burhan Wani, in July 8, 2016, in September 2016, around it's the report which now police has come forward through their agencies, which they have published in the paper, that around 200 boys only in South Kashmir from different villages have joined Hizbul Mujahideen. Hizbul Mujahideen, which was once the frontal organization of Jama'at-i-Islami. So there is a clear-cut way one sees that there is a trend towards more radical groups. People are joining more radical groups. But should we be worried about it as a researcher or as a Kashmiri? Do we need to kind of be worried about if they would have joined a secular group? Should we be worried? Or if they have joined Islamic, should we be worried? But rather than being worried, one needs to ask a question: why? Why is it happening? Is there a push that is happening where you do not have any secular vantage point, where you do not have any secular spaces to express your dissent, where your democratic spaces are being calmed down? Even people used to discuss on the social spaces, now on and off. I'm sure that tomorrow, because tomorrow is a strike there, internet will be off in Kashmir. I'm not even knowing that what's happening back at home. So even such kind of a surveillance, such kind of a calm down of the spaces, religion is kind of a resort for them. People do find their refuge in their religion, and the groups like Jama'at-i-Islami and Hizbul Mujahideen provides that kind of a space for them. It is worrying if this is not kind of an in control within the valley. If there are linkages being made, intra-national linkages being made with pan-Islamic ideologies, then it might be dangerous for a place like Kashmir also, because I'm not sure that Kashmiri society will be able to kind of tolerate that kind of violence as well as that kind of an ideology which is coming from outside. But I'm sure that post-90s, Kashmir has seen different phases. It will be one of such phases. It will again move forward. I'm not sure which direction, but it will. I'm sure that it will move forward. But largely also, because someone asked about the stalemate, there is also some kind of a responsibility which the states, like, because these are nation states, modern nation states, India and Pakistan, and here we are comparing them with the movement, which is kind of which is not a nation. It's a nation in making. It's a struggle. So the states like India and Pakistan have a much more responsibility how they can deal with this and how can they actually stop this stalemate so that people do not shift towards radical ideologies. The question of feminism is an kind of an large question, an important question, which in my research I have always seen that, which I'm sure Mantasha has also might have faced, that people do not want to answer, people do not want to engage with this debate, they want to kind of a distance with this, and the quick answer to it is, which comes from both the groups, is let's discuss it after independence. The way the questions of caste, the questions of class in India were kind of put back forth, and that's a problem. But here I might have a kind of an not agree with you when we say that why not to take Western feminism and gauge there with that, and when we don't have a problem with state, when we do not have a problem with democracy, no, not a problem. But as a researcher, I do question these concepts which come from the modernity, which modernity has given to us colonial people. I do question feminism also, but that doesn't mean that I will not bring. I don't want to address, or I don't want to question the gender equality. This is a very important question, and these groups should need to address it now, not wait for the independence or any solution, because then it will remain the way India, Pakistan, and many other states are dealing with it.
First of all, are there questions online that we can answer?
Just one or two. Okay, first question. If JKLF is based on independentist ideology, how do you claim that they also take result of UN resolutions, rather than talking about UN Charter, which Amanullah Khan and even the current chairman, Yazid Malik, have been talking about? So how do you claim they bank on UN resolutions and not the UN Charter?
Was there any other question online? Was that?
There's a second.
Let's take them both. Just wait. Okay, well, let's do the UN Charter and resolutions.
The JKLF has talked about the UN resolutions in terms of bringing this question to the limelight and also saying that this is an international dispute, while they recognize that an international organizations of the stature of United Nations have been involved in this dispute for a longer period of time, and there are 15 resolutions. But they do not want UN resolution to be applied in terms of solving the problem. And the problem is that UN resolution, if 1948, 1st August 1948, talks about only two possible solutions, that people of Kashmir should either choose India or Pakistan, which is actually totally a different way. JKLF talks about independent Kashmir, which is kind of they say that if the UN resolution is just a framework, but in this framework, there should be a third choice that should be added. So UN resolution, they do recognize this for recognition that this is a dispute, but they do not monitor it through principle.
Yeah. Okay, now we're coming towards the end of the time that we've allotted, but there are many questions still I know that people want to ask. So if Khalid is willing, we can maybe go a little bit beyond our time. Yeah. But what I'd like to do is collect the questions now and then give Khalid as much time as we can to answer them. So I'm just going to take, I'll just come all the way. So at the back first, and then we'll come to Najam and then to you. And
thank you for your presentation.
But please also keep the questions succinct.
So, my question is related to what Mantasha has raised in the last point about the Western ideas. So, for example, in our region where the distinction between public and private sphere is blurred or fluid, and when we talk about secularism, there is an important point of public-private spheres. And in our region where religion determines politics and the distinction between private and public becomes irrelevant sometimes, and as a result, mosques is a spiritual, and it becomes a part of politics as well. So, in a society where religion and the distinction between public and private is very blurred, what are the measures? How do we identify who are secular when we can see the secular forces are using the religious vocabulary?
Okay, thanks very much, Najam.
With the new elections in Indian National Assembly coming up in 2018, do you think that the issue of Kashmir would be treated in what terms you anticipate it will be treated? Thank you.
Okay, question here. Sorry, a question immediately in front.
Okay, thank you. I would like to take you to that stalemate thing, and in 2007 March, if you remember, in back channel, India and Pakistan had agreed, almost agreed on resolution of Kashmir. So I would like to have your opinion and understanding. You might have asked this to both these groups. What is the stance of these groups on this particular solution which they had agreed upon? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah. There's a question here, Maya. Okay, doesn't matter. Whichever order. Please, upload. Yeah.
I came to a research paper about the violence in Afghanistan. This is something similar to this, where it has wreaked and havoc on the mental attitude of the half the population, especially women and men, you see. Whether any research has been done, because if you look at Kashmir, same sort of 40, 50 years of violence and differences has come up. But they will come across any research paper on what is the position of the general population, both Hindus and Muslims.
Now, last chance to ask a question. Who would like to ask the last couple? We've already asked one. But is there anybody else? Okay, there, yes.
I would like to
Oh, you
ask
also
from
asked
the
a question
economic
before, but
dimension. Because a lot of conflict discourse focus on identity and national identity, religious and national identity and secularism. But what is the role of economic dimension in terms of the opportunities available to young people to actually economically empower themselves? And in absence of that, has also led to many young people moving more right-wing and more taking refuge into identity discourse. So if you could also highlight the economic situation.
And then the very last question at the back.
Me?
Yes.
There is a lot of discussion about funding, and Laila as well pointed out about the economic opportunities. And of course, when we talk about economic opportunities available for the public there, for different communities there, we cannot forget about the external funding, regardless of what source it is from, where is that coming from, and on what purposes it's going is usually used. So, and when we talk about funding, then we cannot ignore the sect of Islam, the major sect of Islam of the region. And it actually relates to the other question that the lady just pointed out about feminism. So which sect of Islam they are from? I mean, which sect of Islam is their practice?
Okay, well, if I could invite Khalid to respond to as many of these very broad questions as he can. Yeah.
I think I partly answered the question on the funding. There are the question of political economy has been asked by many people about related to what is the political economy of this conflict. Is there a relation between the economy and the conflict, or is there a relation between the economic opportunities for the young people and their shift towards the radical ideologies? Economics, as in any part of the world, plays a role. So it plays a role in Kashmir also. But there is no causal relation between economic opportunities or not having opportunities and their shift and people shifting to taking up the other identities, or because Indian state has been using this notion of that. One of the ways of solving Kashmir problem is bringing development, or bringing economic opportunities, or bringing jobs to the people, or giving employment to the people. But if you talk to the people who are already employed, who have jobs, or who are economically established, they do also talk about the movement. They also talk about raise the political question. So there is no causal relation between economic opportunity or not opportunity and being part of this political movement or raising the political questions. The major sect, actually, there are different schools of thought within Kashmir, but the majority of the sect is from Sunni sect. Within that Sunni sect, the majority is from the Hanafiya school of thought. So this is kind of the major. Related to this is this whole notion of economic question. There has been some studies on places like Jharkhand or Orissa, or even what we call as red belt in India, where the Naxal movement is happening. That there is a relation between the political economy and the conflict, because it's a conflict over resources. So resources and economy play a part in conflict, where the tribals who have been kept away from the livelihood, they do join as a cadres of Naxal movement. But in Kashmir, it doesn't play a direct role, which I was answering right now. There has been, people do talk about that there are no economic opportunities. They talk about that there has been no industrialization. They talk about there have been less opportunities for them. And but they do not make this as a causal point for the movement. They talk more about the identity. They talk more about the historicity of this movement rather than economic opportunities. And it's interesting to see that if you look at 1952 Kashmir as a state, and you look at all which were 22 states at that time in India, the dependence of these states towards the center was more and Kashmir was less. But over a period of time, over the last 50 years, Kashmir, J&K as a state has become more dependent on the center. And all other states have grown up, as if Kashmir has paused economically. So it's more and more dependent. It's somewhere which Ajit Chatterjee, which he has written on a paper on political economy and Kashmir self-determination movement, where he argues that is it a deliberate attempt so that the question of Azadi will be taken away from Kashmiris, because when they say that we want to be independent, they are not economically viable. It's not an economically viable idea. For each and everything, they are dependent on India. So this takes away the logic of independence. So he just makes a question mark. Is it a deliberate policy which has happened for the last 50 years in Kashmir? And I also think about this. I think about with him that what happened to the Kashmiri economy? Conflict, topography, yes, there's a problem. But are not there all other avenues where Kashmir could have been made self-sufficient in some areas like horticulture, water, or whatever resources, small resources are there? But nothing was done there. So was it a deliberate policy? Yes, sir, there has been studies. Doctors across borders, there is an organization which they say medicine across the borders. They have made a study in Kashmir where they say that large number of the population in Kashmir have been affected by this violence, and there have been psychological problems that over a period of time are happening. And there has been a study even in the psychiatric hospital in Kashmir, and a combined study from sociology department of Kashmir University by Professor Dabla, who have tried to figure out that there has been the change in terms of the psychology, particularly most of the patients are the women who are suffering from totally different problems, which where the conflict is, and conflict as well as the violence has been responsible for this. So there are the studies. Yeah, I think stalemate 2017. 2007, when it was 2007 is not the only time when it was said that Kashmir was about to be solved. Just 2 days back.
But there was a clear solution there.
No, just I'm mentioning. It was just yesterday in the Dawn, the paper which comes from Pakistan, that Benazir Bhutto and Rajiv Gandhi were just close to solve the problem. They were just they have to just sign the document. No, I'm just talking about how this is being played for the larger audience. Yeah. And similarly, it was the case when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister of India. At that time, also it was kind of made public that Nawaz Sharif and Vajpayee. Musharraf came after Kargil. He came after Kargil. He joined them after a year. Before that, it was in 98.
Lahore
Declaration that they were about to solve. And similarly, ex-Prime Minister of India, Mr. Manmohan Singh, and the counterpart in Pakistan. So they have made certain deals, and which happened through different channels, track to diplomacy, which the meetings happened in Dubai and other parts where some Kashmiri political groups were also involved. So they were about to solve, and we don't know what was the framework, what was there in the solution, but it's not being made public, but they were about to solve. But unless the main stakeholders know what is the solution going to happen, it will be again the same repetition. It will actually be, maybe there will be a calmness for certain years, but it will not be a peace. It might emerge.
I've just asked the position of these two parties.
These two parties, Jama'at-i-Islami has totally distanced itself from any kind of a negotiation with the Indian state. JKLF have been a part of certain negotiations, but it even distanced in 2007 that it will not be, it doesn't recognize any kind of a formula, whether it was a Musharraf's point for formula or 2007 Manmohan Singh's plan to solve any problem, to solve the problem of Kashmir.
So this basically explains that this is the reason that this is not going to be solved, because there is a difference between Jama'at-i-Islami and Liberation Front. There is a difference. So that is why there is a stalemate.
There is a difference how do they see the things, but there is no difference in terms of recognizing that this is a dispute. The first thing to solve a problem is that you need to recognize there is a dispute, which Indian state is kind of a distance in itself. It doesn't recognize that it's a dispute.
And can I add to that? Because I was working with UNICEF on
Yeah.
education and peaceful and conflict project in India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
And they both decided that they didn't want UNICEF report to reflect conflict affected states. Pakistan asked us to change the report to say post-conflict state. And India asked us to change conflict affected to areas of civil unrest. So
Yeah. You know?
Yeah, this last two.
Yeah.
Election in 2018, I think it will be one more election in the memory of Kashmiri people. That one more election happened, parliamentary election happened. Most of the people will boycott, and some people will vote off voluntarily, and some people will be forced to vote. And even if people are lucky, they will vote safely, or if they are not lucky, they will vote and they will be bound by the jeep and travel through the village, which happened recently. But 2018 election will be interesting election for BJP. Why? Because in its manifesto, as well as in its various speeches by Prime Minister Modi, who even visited Kashmir, made it clear that they are going to solve Kashmir problem. The Home Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, said that within a year, there will be no Kashmir problem, which I actually think that he's talking about militancy, because he said that there will be an operation all out, that he will finish all the militants. But militancy is just the tip of the iceberg. It's not a Kashmir problem. Kashmir problem is kind of from Pandit Nehru to Modi, it's there. You cannot solve by one regime. It needs steps, which actually is a question of how it will be solved. It's kind of it has become so complex over a period of time that there are different layers to this conflict. And there are, which the gentleman here was saying, the different regions are there. These regions are different stakeholders. The people from different religions are different stakeholders. So the solution needs at different levels. It cannot be, but at least what is responsibility of both the states is that, do they provide a space for any kind of a negotiation? Under this constant violence, are people in Kashmir able to think about any positive peace or any kind of a negotiation? When every day there is an experience, there is an everyday experience of that, when we will be alive or not, there will be a violence or not, somebody will be pick us up and put into interrogation center or not. When that kind of an atmosphere is there, I don't really think that people will be even thinking about what possible solutions are. So there is a need to demilitarize, give a space for people to think, whichever way they think, but at least give a space for think. Last and interesting question is about private and public sphere and this notion of secularism, which is very much debated in South Asia, particularly when we look at Pakistan, India, Kashmir, and other regions. This private and public is kind of there's a very blur. You cannot actually say, directly say, is someone secular or is someone not secular? For example, Gandhi, was he a secular, or he himself called it that I'm an anti-secular? Because religion is a part of me, and religion has to be part of the politics. It's what Gandhi said. And he's a secular par excellence, but he used religion in the politics. And but by religion, one can distinguish when the political groups are they using religious as an ideology, or are they talking about a plural faith, which can have, are they talking about a lived experience, or they are talking about that everyone has to live by the scriptural notes, and if they do not follow the line, there will be either kind of punishments. So those kind of things can bring us a distinction, but it will not be secularism as the Western philosophers talk about. It's because the private and public sphere, as it's clear here, living in England or in other parts of the Europe, you can make a clear distinction between private and public. But in South Asian context, it's so much tangled together that it becomes difficult. But also, what is kind of the leadership of these political groups or the members how do they themselves distinguish between private and public space? Do they keep religion in the private space, or do they do it in a public? That's also one of the ways of kind of looking at these groups. That how do they use religion, or how do they propagate religion? Are they privately religious and publicly not, or are they publicly religious and privately not? So even these debates have been kind of there when one tries to make a comparison between M.K. Gandhi and Jinnah. Who was the religious among them?
Right. So first of all, if I could thank you very, very warmly for your presentation, but also for responding so fully to these very interesting questions. Thank you, and I hope we'll see you. And if it's your first visit to ISMC, we have a regular program of evening lectures, so do please pick up the blue leaflets, and hope we'll see you again.
Your card, Khalid. I run foreign policy. We do work on Kashmir. We do a lot of events in Parliament, and you probably JKLF. You probably know Professor Nazir. He's the JKLF. Yeah, he's been involved. The interesting thing about our forum is we actually been state actors. So we deal with a lot of government. All we have to do is put my name, Google it.